So, lately I've been seeing a lot of discussions about IGN review, mostly around their reviews being bad and biased towards certain games, especially AAA ones. And their excuse is that every AAA game meets some sort of standard of gameplay, and that's why they don't go below a 7. There's even a meme about the fact that they give everything a 7, which I've checked, and they do. But most of them are completely unjustified. If you look at the explanation of what their numbers mean, you'll quickly realize things don't add up. Instead of just adding to the discussion with more reasons why their reviews make very little sense, today I'm here to show you some examples on how their reviews differ from user reviews, and how their scale makes no sense. Let's look at Warcraft 3 Reforged, for example. IGN gave it a 7, believe it or not. They said Warcraft 3 is still a good game. Okay. But this is not Warcraft 3. This is Warcraft 3 Reforged, and it came out in a really bad state. The Metacritic user score was 0.6 out of 10, and if you look at the reviews, users were furious over broken promises, cut content, and technical issues. There were so many technical problems, and users were hoping that if you remake such a classic, you have something to add. That the remake is going to make the game better, that it's going to fill some holes that make the game not hold up to current day standards, like the graphics and whatnot. But in the end it was all for nothing, and users had their voice heard, giving it a 0.6 out of 10 while IGN gave it a 7 out of 10. Now let's look at Far Cry 6 for example. IGN gave it an 8 out of 10 while users gave it a 4.6. And if you read the reviews, you can see the difference in opinions. IGN praised the game for sticking to its formula while the players complained about the lack of innovation. Two completely different takes, and I definitely land on the side of the players here. Players also complained about repetitive missions and the uninspired storytelling. For comparison, IGN gave Far Cry 3 a 9, and this game an 8. It's so criminal that these two games only have 1 point between them, as Far Cry 3 is a classic, a great game, and Far Cry 6 is already forgotten. When it came to Star Wars Battlefront 2, IGN gave it a 6.5 out of 10, which is worlds apart from the 1 out of 10 user score. This was when the game launched, by the way. From the pay-to-win mechanics, the microtransactions, the bugs, and the ridiculous grind you needed to put in the game to buy certain characters, it was obvious that the reception would be majorly negative. You had to play the game for around 60 hours to buy a character like Darth Vader, for example. Which was ridiculous considering that he's a main character and you'd still need to grind for 40 to 60 more hours to buy all the other main characters. Moving on, we've got Wolfenstein Youngblood. IGN gave it a 6.5, but users trashed it with a 2.8 on Metacritic. IGN thought the co-op mechanics were alright, but players weren't here for it. They hated the live service elements, the repetitive structure, and the fact that it didn't live up to the series' narrative legacy. Basically, the heart of Wolfenstein wasn't there, and it really wasn't. This game was filled with childish dialogue that was poorly written, annoying characters, and enemies that were just sponges that took way too long to kill. Now, on to Watch Dogs Legion. IGN was kinda into it, giving it an 8 out of 10. They liked the whole play as anyone thing, which to be fair, it was a cool concept. Metacritic users hit it with a 4.5. Obviously because of the bugs, performance issues, the gameplay got old really fast. Sure, it's fun to play as a grandma, and there's some fun to be had with some modes of transportation, but nearly enough to make this game an 8. The most important things, like the story and some specific parts of the gameplay, the ones that you spend most time doing, were really uninspired. And then there's the train wreck known as Battlefield 2042. IGN gave it a 7 out of 10, saying it had potential with its large-scale battles, but players weren't having it. They hit it with a 2.2 on Metacritic. The game was loaded with bugs, missing key features from old Battlefield games, and the server issues were just awful. IGN said it was ambitious. Yeah, too bad it was broken. It was also a horrible decision to not include a Battle Royale mode at launch. Okay, we can't forget the infamous No Man's Sky launch. IGN gave it a 6 out of 10. kinda middle of the road, but players bombed it with a 2.9. This game was missing so much of what was promised. It eventually turned things around, but at launch it was a mess. IGN said that the exploration was cool, but users were more like, yeah, but where's the rest of the game though? Then there's Mass Effect Andromeda, one of the most disappointing releases in a beloved franchise. IGN gave it a 7.7, saying the exploration was fun and the combat was solid. But users weren't feeling it at all and gave it a 4.9 on Metacritic. Between the bugs, awkward animations, and lackluster story, it just didn't live up to the series standards. Next up, Diablo Immortal. IGN's review came in at a 6 out of 10, but Metacritic's users obliterated it, giving it a 0.4. The main reason? Microtransactions. People were furious at how predatory the pay-to-win mechanics were. IGN said the game was decent for a mobile title, but players straight up rejected it. This game also came at a time where people were hoping for the next Diablo, as in Diablo 4, not a scuffed mobile game. Alright, now let's talk about Call of Duty Vanguard. IGN slapped a 7 out of 10 on it, calling it a pretty standard COD experience. But users gave it a 3.8. Why? Because it's the same old formula. People were tired of it. No real innovation, just a rinse and repeat Call of Duty. The multiplayer was the same old stuff they always do, the campaign was around 6 hours, and the fans of zombies consider this one of the worst zombie experiences ever. And finally, let's talk about The Last of Us Part 2. This one caused some drama. IGN gave it a 10 out of 10, a masterpiece, praising the storytelling, gameplay, and emotional weight. But when you look at the Metacritic user score, they gave it a 5.7 out of 10. So what happened here? Well, a lot of players weren't on board with some of the narrative choices, especially with what happened to certain characters. This led to a massive review bombing campaign. People were torn, but critics loved it. But many gamers felt let down by the story direction. It's one of the biggest divides we've seen between critics and players. To me, the gameplay was in fact a 10 out of 10. I loved the voice acting, the direction, and every encounter with an enemy. But in a story-driven game, the story and the characters is the most important thing. And not only did they fail their characters, but they failed their players. With horrible narrative twists for shock value, and so many puzzling choices that made players not want to play the game. I mean, who wants to play as Abby when you've waited so many years to play again with Ellie and Joel? Who wants to play with the character that killed Joel? Anyway, a 10 out of 10 for a game that betrays its own narrative in a narrative-driven game? Yeah. In conclusion, it's clear that IGN scores often don't line up with what actual players think. Whether it's overly generous ratings or just missing what fans care about the most, there's definitely a huge gap. It's clear that in some cases they just don't want to make big companies mad at them, but I don't think that's the only problem. From their horrible scale to the fact that they're so narrow-minded when reviewing games, not considering the player experience, like bugs, microtransactions, what players were hoping to see, their reviews just aren't a fair assessment of games. And after all of this, most players just don't trust IGN anymore. Let me know what you think about these reviews and IGN in general in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more gaming breakdowns. Peace.